But there are a couple of stories about pastors losing their pulpits in St. Louis. Some of them couldn't survive.
And as I hear you tell this story, it's all it takes is one person to stand up in the face of injustice. And and that, we often think we're small, what we do doesn't matter, but that's like the farthest from the truth. I mean, this is a perfect example of that.
It is. I think the other thing we can say is that in that era, pastors had a good deal more public clout than perhaps we do today. And because of that, it was a very big deal to have one of the St. Louis pastors step up and say, this is wrong. Slavery is wrong, and we can't continue it in our country. He was also a very strong supporter of Abraham Lincoln. I think he tried very hard not to bring partisanship into the pulpit, but it was really hard to do when you're fighting a war and your president is leading that effort. But he was a strong Abraham Lincoln supporter as well.
Yeah. So what surprised you the most in your research for the book?
Well, I think one of them is just trying to put myself in his shoes of personal loss as a pastor around his family. I've had some personal challenges, not death, but personal challenges in my family, and how you live with those in a public situation. Pastors have a very unique role in that our public is right there with us, whether you got 100, 200, 300, or 1,000 members. They're right there. They're looking at you, interacting with you. It's a small community that to whom you're accountable, and it's hard to own up to your losses, your pain, your grief, and then that just followed right after his sense of what he had to do as a moral spokesperson, and that really touched me. That he had gone through that, but was able to process that. He did get remarried, which I think helped a great deal, and I think his second wife, Mary Eleanor, was a good deal more supportive of him going out on a limb, and I'm sure that in part his partner doing that helped a great deal. But it's just that combination of the story and the impact it had. He was on kill lists. They discovered the Confederate. They went into a Confederate stronghold in St. Louis. The Union did, and they took all the books out of it, and they had lists of people who were going to be arrested and lists of people who were going to be killed the minute they found them. Galusha was the number one person on the list of people to be strung up and hung as soon as they got their hands on it. So it wasn't just you and I disagree and we agree to disagree. It was a war, and so it did have a pretty serious price to pay, and his life was in jeopardy. One of the stories that he tells is the Presbyterian pastor down the street from him also is named Anderson. And he was walking to the post office one day to pick up his mail, which is the way they did it in those days. And several people came out of a alley and threw bricks at him and hit him in the head. And he was all, banged up and everything. And they thought they were throwing the bricks at Galusha because they're both named Anderson. They're both pastors. Right. And so the Presbyterian, who was very much a pro-Confederacy supporter, was really irritated with him because he took the punishment for Galusha's stand. So, lots of things like that happen. I tell as many of those stories as I can in the book to show what happens. But I think your point's well taken, that all of us face moral dilemmas, not just pastors, but at one time or another. Whether we're persons of faith or not, we all have values and things that we see going on around us that probably needs to be addressed. And should we do it or somebody else? It's kind of easy to duck and say, well, I'm gonna let Sloan take this one on, and I'm gonna take this one easy. But there does come a time, and I think you're right, when one voice can make a huge difference, and I think his voice made a huge difference in St. Louis, particularly encouraging other pastors to take the same stand.
Yeah. Very inspiring story. My guest this week has been Stephen Jones, author of the book, Galusha, Crisis and Courage, and a Civil War Pastor. Before we close out today, what do you hope the readers learn or take away after reading your book?
Well, I hope they learn to take courage. I'm not saying that Galusha is the only way to go, or that's the only way to do it. And as I mentioned to you, I think if he could have stayed 8 to 10 years and then done it, if time would have allowed that, probably would have gone a lot better. And there are moments when you have to kind of say this isn't the right time. But I think mostly we lack courage, and I think Galusha's life urges us to try to be as courageous as we can with our faith and our values and what we know to be true.
Yeah, I love that message. Stephen, I want to thank you for joining us today and being our guest on Books on Air.
Thank you, Sloan. Nice to be with you.
You can find more about the book, Galusha, Crisis and Courage in a Civil War Pastor, on Amazon, and I'll link to the book in the show notes, so be sure to check that out. You've been listening to the Books on Air podcast, brought to you on webtalkradio.net. You can also hear this podcast on Spotify, iHeartRadio, Stitcher, and Apple Podcasts. I'm Sloan Fremont, and I hope you'll join us for the next Books on Air podcast. Remember, you never know who's going to be here, and you never know what we're going to talk about. Thank you so much for listening.